I waited for them to leave, activated my security system, and watched through the cameras as my daughter-in-law walked potential renters through my property like she was the landlord. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now let me tell you how I ended up watching my own family try to steal my investment property right from under my nose, because trust me, nobody saw this level of deception coming. 4 months earlier, my life looked completely different. I was Susan Moore, 58 years old, recently divorced, and apparently naive enough to believe my son Michael and his wife Jennifer actually cared about my financial recovery. After the messy divorce from Robert, they'd been so supportive, so concerned about my emotional and financial stability. "Mom, you need to rebuild your life on your own terms," Michael had said, bringing me coffee during one of his concerned visits. Jennifer nodded sympathetically, adding, "We just want to see you thrive again, Susan. You deserve independence after everything Robert put you through." What they really wanted was access to my divorce settlement. Not that I realized it at the time. I thought their sudden interest in my finances was genuine family support. When I mentioned Robert's hefty alimony payments and the substantial settlement I'd received, their eyes lit up like they'd won the lottery. "You should invest in something that generates passive income," Jennifer suggested during one of their increasingly frequent visits. "Real estate, maybe. Something that builds wealth while you sleep." Michael agreed immediately. Something that gives you financial security and independence from anyone who might try to control you again. So when I saw the listing for the duplex on Riverside Drive, I fell in love instantly. Victorian conversion, 2 identical units, hardwood floors throughout, updated kitchens, and enough rental income potential to support me comfortably. The upstairs unit could be my residence, while the downstairs unit would provide steady rental income. The asking price was steep, but my settlement money covered it completely. Here's where I made my first smart decision in months. Something told me to keep the purchase quiet. Maybe it was years of Robert's financial manipulation making me protective of my assets. Maybe it was intuition. Whatever it was, I bought that duplex under an LLC, hired a property management company, and kept my mouth shut. For 8 weeks, I had contractors working to make both units perfect. Fresh paint, new appliances, professional landscaping, security system installation. I wanted everything flawless before moving into the upper unit and advertising the lower unit for rent. I imagined the financial freedom, the pride of successful property ownership, the satisfaction of building wealth independently. Instead, I got the shock of my life. The morning I planned to move in, I arrived early to do a final walkthrough. Everything was perfect. The upper unit felt like a luxury apartment, and the lower unit was ready for its first tenant. I was practically vibrating with excitement as I called Michael. "Can you and Jennifer meet me for lunch? I have something wonderful to show you both." "Actually, Mom, Jennifer and I have been house hunting today. We found this amazing investment property that might be perfect for our financial goals." Michael's voice carried that careful tone he used when discussing money. My heart skipped. Since when were they interested in real estate investment? "Oh? Tell me about it." "Well, we've been thinking about our financial future, especially with Jennifer's student loans and my inconsistent freelance income. We found this incredible duplex on Riverside Drive. 2 units, great rental potential, perfect for building long-term wealth." I felt my stomach drop. They were looking at my property. My surprise was about to become their disappointment when they discovered they couldn't afford it. "The only problem," Michael continued, "is the down payment. It's way beyond our savings. We'd need a co-signer or a private investor." My pulse quickened. "Where exactly is this property?" "Riverside Drive, number 67. The real estate agent says it has incredible potential. Jennifer's already calculated the rental income projections." I hung up and sat in my beautiful new kitchen, staring at my phone. This could work out perfectly. Instead of just telling them about my investment, I could let them think they'd discovered it independently, then offer to help them get involved as partners. But when I arrived at Riverside Drive and saw Jennifer walking around the property with a clipboard, taking notes like she was conducting a professional assessment, something felt off. She was measuring the front garden, photographing angles, talking to someone on her phone about our renovation timeline and the rental income we're projecting. I parked across the street and watched. Michael joined her, and they spent another 30 minutes discussing logistics, examining windows, and clearly planning like people who already had access to detailed property information. They weren't looking at the duplex like potential buyers. They were planning like people who already had inside information. That's when I realized I'd made a terrible mistake, not buying the property, but trusting them to see it before I revealed it was already mine. I decided to test them. When they finally called me over, I put on my best impressed face and let them give me a tour of my own property. "Look at this kitchen, Mom," Jennifer gushed, running her hands over the granite counters I'd spent weeks selecting. "I can already see the rental potential here. Professional tenants would love this space." She led me upstairs to what I'd designed as my new home. This upper unit would be perfect for us to live in while we manage the rental business. You could visit any time, of course. My home would become their residence while they managed my investment property. Michael nodded enthusiastically. "The whole setup is perfect, Mom. You'd love being involved in a family real estate business. Very stable income, great investment opportunity." I managed to keep smiling, but inside I was calculating. They'd already decided I'd be financing their real estate venture, but not as an equal partner. I'd be the elderly investor, providing capital while they lived in my property and managed my business. "The only challenge," Jennifer continued, walking back toward the lower unit, "is that the seller apparently wants a significant down payment. Something about proving serious intent from qualified buyers." Michael sighed. "Which means we'd need substantial upfront capital, even with Mom's help. We're talking about using most of our available resources just for the down payment." Jennifer's face fell dramatically. "So close to perfect, and it's just out of reach financially." They stood there looking defeated, and I realized this was my moment. I could reveal the truth, tell them the property was already ours, and watch their faces light up with joy. Or I could wait and see what they did next. "What if you looked at something smaller?" I suggested carefully. "Something more within your actual budget range?" Jennifer's expression hardened slightly. "Susan, this property represents exactly the kind of opportunity Robert never would have let you pursue. This is your chance to build real wealth, to show everyone you can succeed independently." The casual manipulation took my breath away, using my divorce trauma to justify spending my settlement money on their real estate dreams. "You're right," I said slowly. "Robert never would have supported something like this. Let me think about this overnight." That evening, I sat in my current apartment staring at the property deed for the duplex. My name clear as day as the legal owner. I'd been so excited to share this achievement with my family. Now I was wondering if I should share anything with them at all. The next morning, Michael called before I'd finished my coffee. "Mom, we've been thinking about that property all night." Jennifer barely slept. "We really believe this could be the fresh start our family needs financially." "I understand it's an attractive property, Michael. The thing is, we drove by there again this morning, and there's apparently another investor looking at it. The agent says they might put in an offer today." I almost laughed. There was no other investor, no competing offer. I owned the property, but Michael was lying to create urgency, pressure me into making a quick financial decision. "That's unfortunate," I said mildly. "Mom, we need to move fast. If you're serious about helping us, we need to make an offer today. Full asking price, serious down payment." "That's a substantial portion of my settlement, Michael." "I know it's a big ask, but think about the return on investment. Property values in that neighborhood are only going up, and you'd have steady rental income plus equity appreciation. Plus, you'd be helping your family build financial security. Build financial security while they lived in my property and managed my investment." "Let me call the real estate agent directly," I said. "If I'm investing this much, I want to speak with them myself." There was a pause. "Mom, Jennifer's already been handling the communication. She's built a good relationship with the agent. Maybe it's better if she continues managing the details." Michael, if I'm writing a check for this amount, I'm speaking to the agent myself. After I hung up, I called the property management company I'd hired. Lisa, I need you to create a fake competing offer scenario. If anyone calls asking about the property, tell them there's significant investor interest and time pressure. Mrs. Moore, you own the property. Why would you want to create false competition? Because I want to see exactly how far my family will go to manipulate me into funding their lifestyle. 2 hours later, Michael called back. Great news, Mom. Our agent says the other investor's offer has some financing contingencies. We still have a chance, but we need to move immediately with a cash offer. I felt something cold settle in my chest. My own son was lying to my face, creating fake urgency to pressure me into spending my divorce settlement on a property I already owned. Wonderful, Michael. Set up a meeting with the agent for tomorrow. All 3 of us should be there to discuss terms. Actually, Jennifer thinks it might be more efficient if you wire the down payment first, then we handle the contract details. She's become the point person on this deal. Of course she had. The next morning, I received the most manipulative text message of my life. Mom, the other investor outbid us. We lost the property. Jennifer's devastated. She was so excited about finally building real wealth together and giving you the family business opportunity you deserve. I'm sorry we couldn't make it work. I stared at my phone in my apartment, surrounded by moving boxes. Because here's what Michael didn't know. I'd spent the previous evening packing, not to move in with them as a business partner, but to move into my property alone. I texted back, that's disappointing. I'm sure another opportunity will come along. Within an hour, Jennifer called. Her voice was thick with tears that sounded remarkably fake to my newly skeptical ears. Susan, I'm so sorry. I know how excited you were about the real estate investment opportunity. Michael told me you were looking forward to the passive income and the family business aspect. Interesting. I'd never mentioned being excited about any specific business arrangements. She was projecting what she thought I should feel. These things happen, Jennifer. The agent said the other investor might back out. Sometimes deals fall through at the last minute. If you're still interested in partnering with us, we could stay in contact with her. See if it becomes available again. I almost admired the persistence. Create false hope, keep me emotionally invested, maintain the possibility that my money could still fund their dreams. I'll think about it. That afternoon, I drove to the duplex one last time before moving in. I wanted to savor the moment when I walked through the front door as the rightful owner, not the elderly investor being granted participation in their business venture. But as I turned onto Riverside Drive, I saw Jennifer's car in the driveway. I parked at the end of the block and watched. Jennifer was walking around the property with a young couple, pointing at features, gesturing toward the upper unit, clearly giving some kind of rental tour. They spent 20 minutes outside before Jennifer unlocked the front door with a key I definitely hadn't given her, a key she had to a property she thought we'd lost to other investors. I sat in my car, fury building with each passing minute. Jennifer was showing my property to potential tenants using a key she'd somehow obtained, barely hours after telling me we'd lost our chance to buy it. Then I watched her bring out rental applications. She was pre-screening tenants for a property Jennifer thought belonged to someone else, unless she knew something I didn't. Unless this whole charade about other investors and lost opportunities was covering up something much worse. I called the property management company. Lisa, has anyone contacted you about accessing the Riverside property? No, Mrs. Moore. You're the only one with keys. What about showing it to potential renters? The property isn't even listed for rent yet. No one else should have access. But someone did have access. Someone was in my property right now conducting unauthorized rental showings. I made a decision that would change everything. I drove home, called a locksmith, and had every lock on the duplex changed within 2 hours. Then I called the security company and upgraded to live monitoring with immediate alerts. If Jennifer wanted to play games with my property, she was going to discover I could play them better. The locksmith was expensive. The upgraded security was expensive. But watching Jennifer try to use her mysterious key on my front door the next morning? Priceless. I was sitting in the upper unit, boxes half unpacked, coffee in hand, when I heard someone trying to unlock the door downstairs. The security app on my phone showed Jennifer on the porch looking confused as her key failed to work. She tried it several times, then walked around to the back entrance. Same result. Then she called the real estate agent, who was actually Lisa from my property management company, playing along with my deception test. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see Jennifer gesturing angrily at the building, clearly frustrated that her secret access had been cut off. 20 minutes later, Michael called me. "Mom, the strangest thing happened. Jennifer drove by that property we were looking at, and she thinks someone might have changed the locks. She's worried there might be squatters or vandalism." Why would Jennifer be checking on a property we don't own? A pause. She thought she saw suspicious activity from the street. She was just being cautious about the neighborhood. The lies were getting more elaborate, but they were still lies. Jennifer hadn't seen suspicious activity because there wasn't any. She'd been trying to access my property with a key she shouldn't have had. Michael, how did Jennifer get a key to that property? Another pause. Longer this time. What key? She tried to unlock both doors this morning. I saw her on the security cameras. Silence. Then Michael's voice, carefully controlled. Mom, what security cameras? The ones I had installed yesterday on my property. The property I own. The sound that came through the phone might have been Michael choking on his coffee. Or it might have been the sound of someone's entire deception collapsing in real time. Your property. His voice was barely a whisper. The duplex I bought 2 months ago with my divorce settlement. The property I've been renovating while you and Jennifer plan to manipulate me into funding your real estate venture with my money. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, he spoke. Mom, we need to talk. Yes, Michael, we certainly do. But first, I think you need to explain to your wife that conducting unauthorized rental showings on someone else's property is illegal, even when you think you're clever enough not to get caught. That evening, as I sat in my beautiful upper unit, eating takeout Thai food off paper plates because I hadn't finished unpacking my dishes yet, I thought about how different this moment was from what I'd originally planned. I should have been celebrating with Michael and Jennifer, toasting our family business venture and our bright financial future together. Instead, I was alone in my property, watching security footage of my daughter-in-law trying to rent out my investment without permission, while my son prepared to explain how they'd planned to steal my independence through emotional manipulation. But here's the thing about rock bottom: the view from the top is so much clearer when you've earned the climb yourself. Michael arrived at 8 p.m. sharp, looking like he'd aged 10 years since our phone call. Jennifer wasn't with him, which told me everything I needed to know about who was really driving their scheme. Mom, I don't even know where to begin. How about with how your wife got a key to my property? He sat heavily in my new living room chair, the one I'd picked specifically because it was comfortable but practical for my new independent lifestyle. She befriended someone at the real estate office, told them she was your daughter-in-law helping coordinate the purchase process. They gave her a key for family access during the supposed buying period. I had to admire the audacity, even as it made my blood boil. So Jennifer has been planning to manipulate me for weeks. She found out about your purchase a day after you signed the papers. Your bank called to verify some transfer details, and Jennifer answered your phone. She told them she was helping you manage the transaction. The lies kept getting bigger. I never asked her to help manage anything. She knows that. But the bank representative didn't ask for verification. Jennifer got enough information to figure out what you'd done. I poured myself a glass of wine, noting that my hands were perfectly steady. 6 months ago, this level of betrayal would have destroyed me. Now it just felt like confirmation of what I'd suspected. So instead of talking to me directly, you decided to manipulate me into funding your real estate business on a property I already owned. Michael's face crumpled. It was Jennifer's idea. She said if we confronted you directly, you might get defensive about spending so much money alone. She thought if we could make you think it was our idea to invest together, you'd feel better about including family in your financial decisions. Include family by letting you live in my property while managing my rental business. We didn't think you'd actually want to manage rental properties alone. Jennifer figured you'd eventually want to simplify, maybe just collect passive income while we handled the day-to-day operations. We could pay you market rate rent for our unit, plus manage the rental unit for a small fee. Everyone would benefit. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised to be honest and kind, and saw someone I barely recognized. Michael, do you hear yourself? You plan to trick me into giving you money for a property I already owned, then convince me to let you live there while managing my investment. When you say it like that, it sounds criminal. Because it is criminal. It's called fraud. He put his head in his hands. We never meant for it to go this far. Jennifer just got excited about the property, started planning, making contacts. She thought if she could show you how perfect the arrangement would be for everyone. Everyone except me, living upstairs while you built equity and business income from my investment. That was never the plan. I pulled out my phone and showed him the security footage from that morning. Jennifer trying multiple keys, walking around the property, peering in windows, calling him in frustration. This was never the plan either, I suppose. The next morning, Jennifer called me directly for the first time in weeks. Her voice had lost all pretense of sweetness. Susan, Michael told me about your revelation. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. Oh, I understand perfectly. You've been planning to defraud me for weeks. That's an incredibly harsh interpretation. We were trying to find a solution that worked for everyone's financial benefit. I almost laughed. A solution where you live in my property and manage my business while I provide all the capital and take all the risk. You're twisting our intentions. We never wanted to harm your financial independence. Jennifer, you obtained keys to my property under false pretenses. You've been conducting unauthorized rental showings. You impersonated someone with authority over my financial transactions. What part of that was meant to help my independence? A long pause. Then her voice changed completely, dropping the fake concern and revealing something much colder. Fine. You want to play hardball? You bought that property to manipulate us. You knew we were looking at real estate investment. Knew we needed financial opportunities. You bought it specifically to dangle it in front of us, then snatch it away. The accusation was so ridiculous I actually did laugh. Jennifer, I bought the property as an investment for my own financial security. I was planning to offer you both the opportunity to be involved as genuine partners. Right. That's why you kept it secret for 2 months. I kept it secret because I wanted it to be perfect before I shared my success with family who I thought would be proud of my independence. Another pause. Prove it. I'm sorry. Prove you bought it as a potential partnership opportunity. Show me documentation that says you intended to include Michael as a co-owner or business partner. I realized then that Jennifer had never believed I might be generous. In her mind, every action had an ulterior motive. Every kindness was manipulation. She couldn't conceive of someone wanting to share success with family members. I don't need to prove my intentions to you, Jennifer. But I can prove that you've been committing fraud and trespassing on my property. Michael's your son. Family has a right to. Family has a right to honesty and respect. You lost that right when you decided to lie and scheme instead of having an honest conversation about money. The conversation ended with Jennifer hanging up on me. 20 minutes later, Michael called. Mom, Jennifer's really upset. She feels like you're punishing her for caring about our family's financial future. Michael, your wife committed multiple crimes. She's not the victim here. Couldn't we all just sit down and work this out? Find a way to make this beneficial for everyone. I looked around my beautiful upper unit, thinking about how many compromises I'd made during my marriage, how many times I'd given in to keep peace in the family. Michael, I'm done making arrangements that benefit everyone else at my own expense. For 3 weeks, my phone rang constantly. Michael called every morning, Jennifer every afternoon, sometimes together in the evening. The pattern was predictable: guilt, bargaining, anger, more guilt. Mom, we're really struggling financially. Jennifer's student loans are crushing us, and my freelance work is inconsistent. We thought the real estate partnership could solve everything. That stopped me cold. Struggling how badly? We're behind on rent. Jennifer's been doing gig work, but it's not enough. We were really counting on the rental income opportunity. And there it was. They weren't just greedy, they were desperate. The elaborate scheme wasn't about luxury, it was about survival. Michael, why didn't you just ask for help? Because you've already been through so much with the divorce. We didn't want to burden you with our problems when you're trying to rebuild your own life. I understood that feeling. The pride that makes you do stupid things rather than admit you need help. So instead of asking, you decided to trick me. Jennifer thought if we could make it seem like a mutual business opportunity, you'd feel good about it instead of like we were taking advantage. Michael's confession should have made me feel better, but it only made me angrier. Because underneath his explanation was the same condescending assumption that had driven everything else, that I was too fragile to handle the truth about their financial crisis. Michael, I've been managing my own feelings and finances for 58 years. I don't need you to protect me from my own generosity. I know that now. We made a mistake. You made several mistakes. Fraud, trespassing, identity theft, lying to my face about your actions. He flinched. What happens now? Now you and Jennifer figure out your financial situation without involving my property or my money. You get real jobs, create a real budget, find an apartment you can actually afford. And our relationship? I looked at this man who'd spent weeks planning to manipulate me out of my investment property, who was now asking if we could still have a relationship. Michael, the fact that you think I should trust you with anything after what you've done tells me you still don't understand how badly you've behaved. 6 months later, I hosted my first housewarming party in the Duplex. Not for Michael and Jennifer, who'd moved in with Jennifer's parents while they addressed their financial crisis with honesty instead of manipulation. I hosted the party for my downstairs tenant, Sarah, a young teacher who appreciated having a landlord who lived on site and cared about maintaining a quality property. For my neighbors who'd welcomed me to the street with genuine warmth. For my divorce support group, who'd celebrated every step of my journey toward financial independence. These people, who'd known me for months rather than years, had shown me more genuine support than my own family had during the most challenging period of my life. Michael and I were slowly rebuilding our relationship. He'd started calling every other week, conversations that were awkward but honest. He'd insisted on paying me back for some old loans, was working 2 jobs, and was learning to live within his means. Jennifer and I maintained no contact. Through Michael, I heard she'd found full-time work and was addressing her spending habits, but I could sense through his carefully neutral updates that she still thought I'd overreacted. But the real revelation came from my lawyer, who'd done some research into Jennifer's background after I told him the full story. Mrs. Moore, I thought you should know this wasn't Jennifer's first time manipulating family members for financial gain. Her college roommate's parents co-signed a lease for her and she defaulted, leaving them responsible for months of rent payments. The pattern was clear. Jennifer hadn't stumbled into fraud through desperation. She'd learned to view other people's resources as solutions to her financial problems. What happened with that situation? They pursued legal action, but Jennifer declared bankruptcy. She's very skilled at avoiding consequences while maximizing other people's financial exposure. I thought about how close I'd come to the same fate. If I hadn't kept the property purchase secret, if I hadn't installed security cameras, if I'd been just a little more trusting or a little more isolated, I would have ended up funding their lifestyle while they built wealth from my investment. Instead, I was sitting in my beautiful duplex, financially independent, surrounded by people who'd chosen to know me rather than use me. But the story wasn't over yet. 3 months after Michael moved out, I received a call that would test everything I'd learned about protecting myself from manipulation. Mrs. Moore? This is Detective Rodriguez with the Financial Crimes Unit. We've been investigating your daughter-in-law Jennifer Parker in connection with an elderly fraud case. We understand you may have been one of her targets. My blood ran cold. What kind of fraud case? She's accused of convincing an 78-year-old woman to wire her $50,000 for a fake real estate investment opportunity. The victim thought she was investing in a property development project that Jennifer claimed to be managing. The same tactics. The same manipulation. But this time Jennifer had found a victim who was more vulnerable than I'd been. The victim is Mrs. Eleanor Chen. Jennifer approached her at a community center, befriended her over several weeks, then gradually introduced the investment opportunity. Mrs. Chen thought she was helping a young woman succeed in business while earning good returns on her retirement savings. I felt sick. While I'd been congratulating myself on escaping Jennifer's scheme, she'd been perfecting her techniques on someone more vulnerable. We'd like you to come in and give a statement about your experiences with Mrs. Parker. Your case could help establish a pattern of behavior that strengthens our prosecution. That afternoon, I sat in the police station telling my story to detectives who nodded grimly as I described Jennifer's methods. Apparently, my experience fit a textbook pattern of what they called affinity fraud, criminals who build false relationships to gain access to victims' assets. The good news, Detective Rodriguez told me, is that your documentation is excellent. The security footage, the recorded conversations, the timeline you kept, it's exactly the kind of evidence that helps us build strong cases. What about Mrs. Chin? Will she get her money back? That depends on what assets Jennifer has left. Unfortunately, people like this usually spend the money as quickly as they steal it. But your willingness to testify could help ensure she faces real consequences this time. The trial took place 8 months later. I testified about Jennifer's elaborate scheme, the fake keys, the unauthorized rental showings, the identity theft. Michael testified about the lies she'd told him, the financial pressure she'd created, the way she'd isolated him from family and friends. But the most powerful testimony came from Mrs. Chen herself. This tiny, dignified woman took the stand and described how Jennifer had spent weeks earning her trust, learning about her late husband, her financial fears, her desire to leave something meaningful for her grandchildren. She made me feel like I was smart and sophisticated, Mrs. Chin said in a voice that barely carried to the back of the courtroom. She said I reminded her of her own grandmother, who had taught her about the importance of wise investments. She made me feel special, like I was helping her succeed while also securing my own future. Jennifer had used Mrs. Chen's love for her own grandchildren against her, convincing her that this investment would allow her to leave a larger inheritance while also supporting a young woman's entrepreneurial dreams. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Jennifer was convicted of elder fraud, identity theft, and multiple counts of obtaining money under false pretenses. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to her victims. But Mrs. Chin never recovered her money. Jennifer had spent it all on luxury purchases and high-end vacations, living the lifestyle she'd always felt entitled to. During the victim impact phase of the sentencing, I chose to speak not just about my own experience, but about what I'd learned about predators who target families and vulnerable adults. Your Honor, I said, looking directly at Jennifer, the defendant didn't just steal money or commit fraud. She weaponized trust, love, and family loyalty. She turned normal human emotions into tools for exploitation. Mrs. Chen trusted her because Jennifer reminded her of her granddaughter. I almost fell for her schemes because she positioned herself as someone who cared about my financial security after my divorce. Jennifer stared at me with the same calculating expression I'd seen that day in my living room, like she was still trying to figure out an angle that would work in her favor. People like Jennifer don't just damage their immediate victims, I continued. They make all of us more suspicious, more guarded, less willing to trust or help others. They poison the well of human kindness that communities depend on. After the sentencing, Mrs. Chin approached me in the courthouse hallway. "Thank you for being strong enough to fight her," she said, taking my hands in hers. "I was so ashamed I almost didn't report it. I thought people would think I was stupid or senile." "You weren't stupid," I told her firmly. "You were kind and trusting, which are wonderful qualities. Jennifer was the one who chose to exploit those qualities for her own gain. Mrs. Chen and I stayed in touch after the trial. She became one of my closest friends, and we often spoke at community centers about financial fraud awareness, teaching other seniors how to recognize and avoid the tactics that had almost worked on both of us. The irony wasn't lost on me that Jennifer's attempt to manipulate me had ultimately led to her downfall. If she'd left my family alone after I discovered her scheme, she might have continued finding new victims indefinitely. But her compulsion to keep manipulating people, even after being caught, had led her to Mrs. Chen, and Mrs. Chen had led her to prison. Michael's recovery took longer than the legal proceedings. Even after Jennifer was sentenced, he struggled with guilt and self-doubt. "I brought her into our family," he told me during one of our weekly dinners. "I exposed you to her. If I'd been smarter, more observant." "Michael," I interrupted, "Jennifer's behavior is not your responsibility. Manipulators are skilled at what they do precisely because they can fool good people who want to believe the best about others." But there were signs. Things that bothered me that I explained away. Yes, there probably were. And now you know what those signs look like. That knowledge will protect you and the people you care about in the future. But beating yourself up about not recognizing a con artist's techniques isn't helpful to anyone. He started attending support groups for people who'd been involved with manipulative partners. He learned about trauma bonding, gaslighting, and financial abuse. He discovered that his experience, while painful, was far from unique. "The hardest part," he told me one evening, "is learning to trust my own judgment again. For years, Jennifer convinced me that my perceptions were wrong, that I was overreacting to things, that I didn't understand the full picture. Now I second-guess every instinct." "That will get better with time and practice," I assured him. "The fact that you're aware of it means you're already healing." 2 years after Jennifer's sentencing, Michael met Catherine at his support group. She'd been married to a financial abuser who destroyed her credit and left her financially devastated. Their relationship grew slowly, built on mutual understanding of what healthy boundaries looked like. When Michael finally introduced us, I was struck by how different his demeanor was. He was relaxed, confident, able to express opinions without constantly checking Catherine's reaction. She, in turn, encouraged his independence and celebrated his successes without trying to insert herself into every aspect of his life. "I never realized how exhausting it was to constantly manage someone else's emotions," he told me privately. "With Jennifer, I was always trying to prevent her next crisis or smooth over her latest scheme. With Catherine, I can just be myself." Their wedding was small and beautiful, held in the garden behind my duplex. Mrs. Chen helped me arrange the flowers, and Sarah, my former tenant who'd become a dear friend, officiated the ceremony. As I watched Michael and Catherine exchange vows that emphasized mutual respect and honest communication, I thought about the journey that had brought us all to this moment. Jennifer's scheme had almost destroyed my relationship with my son and cost me my financial security. But surviving it had taught me lessons I might never have learned otherwise: the importance of trusting my instincts, the value of documentation and evidence, the difference between healthy family dynamics and manipulation. Most importantly, it had shown me that I was stronger and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. The scared, recently divorced woman who'd bought that duplex as a symbol of independence had become someone who could protect herself, help others, and rebuild relationships on foundations of honesty rather than obligation. But the wedding also marked the beginning of a new chapter in my activism against elder fraud. Mrs. Chen and I had started volunteering with a nonprofit organization that educated seniors about financial scams, and our work was expanding beyond what either of us had initially imagined. "Susan," Mrs. Chen said as we cleaned up after the reception, "I've been thinking about what Detective Rodriguez told us last month, about how Jennifer was just one person in a much larger network of people targeting seniors. What if we could do more than just give presentations at community centers?" She was referring to new information that had emerged during Jennifer's appeals process. The FBI had discovered that Jennifer had been in contact with other fraudsters, sharing victim information and techniques through online forums dedicated to what they called senior mining. "What did you have in mind?" I want to start a foundation. Something that not only educates people about fraud, but also provides legal and financial support to victims who can't afford to fight back. The idea was ambitious, but Mrs. Chen had the passion and I had the resources. Over the next 6 months, we established the Chenmore Foundation for Elder Financial Protection. Our first initiative was a hotline staffed by volunteers who had been fraud victims themselves, people who understood the shame and confusion that kept many victims from seeking help. Our second initiative was more controversial, a database of known fraudsters and their methods, accessible to law enforcement and financial institutions. We faced legal challenges from people who claimed we were violating their privacy rights, but we persisted with the help of attorneys who donated their services. "Mrs. Moore," said Detective Rodriguez during one of our quarterly meetings, "your foundation has already helped us identify 3 separate fraud rings operating in this region. The pattern recognition you've built into your database is helping us connect cases that previously seemed unrelated." The database had grown to include over 400 documented fraudsters and their known aliases, methods, and target preferences. Financial institutions used it to flag suspicious activities, and law enforcement agencies used it to build stronger cases against repeat offenders. But perhaps our most important work was the Victim Support Program. We provided emergency financial assistance to people who had lost their homes or life savings to fraud, and we connected them with counselors who specialized in financial trauma. "I never thought I'd be grateful for what Jennifer did to me," I told Mrs. Chen as we reviewed grant applications for our expanded programs. "But if my experience helps protect even one other person from going through what we went through, then something good came from something terrible." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't trusted your instincts that first day?" she asked. I thought about it often. If I hadn't installed security cameras, if I hadn't documented Jennifer's actions, if I'd been more trusting or more isolated, the outcome could have been very different. "I think about the Susan who bought that duplex," I said. She was scared and uncertain, making her first major financial decision after divorce. She could have easily been taken advantage of. But she also had a strength she didn't know she possessed. What strength was that? The strength to trust herself when everyone around her was telling her to trust someone else instead. 3 years after Jennifer's conviction, we received news that would test everything we'd learned about justice and forgiveness. Jennifer's attorney contacted us to say she wanted to participate in a restorative justice program, a process where offenders meet with their victims to acknowledge harm and work toward healing. "Absolutely not," was Michael's immediate response when I told him about the request. "She'll just use it as another opportunity to manipulate people." Mrs. Chin agreed. "That woman caused enough pain. Why should we help her feel better about what she did?" But I found myself considering it. Not because I believed Jennifer had genuinely changed, but because I wondered if facing her victims might force her to confront the reality of her actions in a way that prison apparently hadn't. "I want to hear what she has to say," I told the restorative justice coordinator. "But only if Mrs. Chen and Michael can be there, and only if the session is recorded for use in future parole hearings." The meeting took place in a conference room at the county courthouse. Jennifer looked older, thinner, but her eyes still held the same calculating quality I remembered. She'd prepared what sounded like a rehearsed speech about taking responsibility and wanting to make amends. "I know I hurt all of you," she said, looking directly at each of us in turn. "I was in a dark place in my life, making bad decisions, and I let my financial desperation override my moral compass. I want you to know that I think about the pain I caused every day." It was a performance carefully crafted to sound remorseful without actually admitting to the full scope of her crimes. She positioned herself as someone who had made mistakes rather than someone who had systematically preyed on vulnerable people. "Jennifer," I said when she finished, "do you remember Mrs. Eleanor Kim from Colorado? The woman whose husband died of a heart attack after discovering your fraud." Her expression flickered, just for a moment, before returning to its practiced remorse. "I remember that situation was very complicated." "Complicated how?" "There were misunderstandings about the nature of our financial arrangement. I never intended for anyone to be hurt. Mrs. Chin leaned forward. What about me, Jennifer? When you convinced me to wire you $50,000 for a fake real estate investment, was that also a misunderstanding? Mrs. Chen, I genuinely believe that investment opportunity was legitimate. When it fell through, I should have contacted you immediately, but I was embarrassed and scared. Every answer was a deflection, a minimization, an attempt to reframe her calculated fraud as a series of unfortunate misunderstandings. She took no real responsibility, showed no genuine remorse, and offered no meaningful acknowledgement of the deliberate nature of her crimes. This was a mistake, Michael said as we left the courthouse. She's exactly the same person she always was, just with a new script. But I disagreed. The meeting had been valuable, not because Jennifer had changed, but because it had confirmed that she hadn't. Her performance in that conference room became part of the record that would follow her to every future parole hearing, a documented example of her continued inability to take genuine responsibility for her actions. Some people can't be rehabilitated, I told the restorative justice coordinator. And it's important for the system to acknowledge that reality instead of assuming that everyone can be saved. 6 months later, Jennifer's parole application was denied again. The board cited our recorded session as evidence that she remained a danger to the community, particularly to vulnerable adults who might be taken in by her apparent remorse. Meanwhile, our foundation continued to grow. We'd helped over 200 fraud victims recover some of their losses, prevented an estimated $2.3 million in attempted frauds through our education programs, and assisted law enforcement in prosecuting 15 separate fraud cases. But the work that meant the most to me was the support groups we ran for family members of fraud victims. These sessions brought together people like Michael, loving relatives who had been manipulated into enabling fraud, or who carried guilt about not protecting their loved ones from scammers. The hardest part, said Patricia, whose mother had lost $80,000 to a romance scammer, is that everyone asks why I didn't see the signs, why I didn't stop it from happening. As if it's my fault that my 75-year-old mother fell for a professional con artist. The guilt is part of their strategy, I explained. Fraudsters don't just target their primary victims, they manipulate entire family systems. They count on relatives feeling guilty and ashamed because that shame keeps families from talking openly about what happened. These conversations reminded me why our work mattered. Financial fraud isn't just about money, it's about trust, dignity, family relationships, and community connections. When fraudsters destroy those things, the ripple effects can last for generations. But healing was possible. I watched Michael rebuild his confidence and find love with someone who valued his authentic self. I watched Mrs. Chen transform her victimization into purpose, becoming one of the most effective fraud prevention advocates in our state. I watched families learn to talk openly about money, boundaries, and the difference between helping and enabling. Most importantly, I learned that surviving betrayal could become a source of strength rather than shame. The woman who had almost lost her life savings to her daughter-in-law's scheme had become someone who could protect others from similar fates. Do you ever regret fighting back? Mrs. Chen asked me recently as we prepared for a presentation to a group of financial advisors. Never, I said without hesitation. The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to trust my own instincts. What would you tell someone who's in the middle of a similar situation right now? I thought about that question for a long moment, considering all the people who had contacted our foundation after reading about our story, all the families struggling with the discovery that someone they loved had been systematically deceiving them. I would tell them that their feelings are valid, their suspicions probably have merit, and their financial security is worth protecting even if it means disappointing people who claim to love them. I would tell them that real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your dignity or your independence. And if they're scared to act? I would tell them that being scared is normal, but being paralyzed by fear serves only the people who want to take advantage of them. I would tell them that they're stronger than they think, smarter than they've been told, and worthy of relationships built on respect rather than manipulation. And finally, I would tell them that they're not alone, that they don't have to fight these battles by themselves, and that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Mom, Jennifer's parole hearing is next month. Catherine and I wanted you to know in case you want to submit a victim impact statement. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and justice and the difference between letting go of anger and ensuring that predators face appropriate consequences. I texted back, I'll write a statement. Some people need to be reminded that actions have consequences. 3 years in prison hadn't changed Jennifer's fundamental nature. According to the parole board reports, she'd spent her time filing grievances against prison staff, claiming unfair treatment, and attempting to manipulate other inmates into supporting her various appeals and complaints. She'd also sent letters to several of her victims, including me, expressing what she called regret for any misunderstandings, while maintaining that her intentions had always been to help people make better financial decisions. Even from prison, she couldn't bring herself to take genuine responsibility for the pain she'd caused. My victim impact statement was brief and direct. Jennifer Parker is a predator who uses people's love and trust as weapons against them. She has shown no genuine remorse, no real understanding of the harm she's caused, and no meaningful change in her approach to relationships. She remains a danger to vulnerable adults and should serve her full sentence. The parole board agreed. Jennifer would remain in prison for at least another year, with no guarantee of release even then. Some people never learn, but some of us learn exactly enough to save ourselves and protect others. And sometimes that's the only victory that matters, but it's also the most important one. Thanks for reading. Don't forget to share your thoughts and feel free to tell your own story in the comments. Your experience matters and you're not alone. If you or someone you know has been targeted by financial fraud, remember that reporting it isn't just about getting justice for yourself. It's about protecting the next potential victim. Every predator who faces consequences is one less threat to our communities.